Are you looking for some fun designs this Halloween? Let me show you a few different ways to make pumpkin cookies. So here we're starting off with a rectangle shaped cookie. And even though we're making a pumpkin, I'm going to show you how you can kind of make different designs on the shapes that you have. So I've put some flood icing down and I'm going to just spread it out with my brush here. And we're just going to cover the edges of where the design is not going to be so that we don't have a plain cookie underneath. This is kind of good for two things. If you really want to speed through decorating and you don't want to do a layer on the base and wait for that to dry and then do your design. So this kind of speeds things up because the icing will dry quickly and you can move on much faster. Or if someone doesn't like so much icing, let's say you're making for adults, they don't want to eat tons of sugar, this is a good way to save a little bit of the icing so your whole cookie is not covered in layers and layers of icing. Some people like the look of a base layer flooded and then the design on top. Or there's also this option. I like both ways. I tend to flood the base as well, so there's no wrong way of doing it. It really is, if you just want to crank out cookies faster, this is a really, really good way to do it. So now that we have the outside all covered, and you can see it's dried pretty quickly here. I gave it a few minutes in my dehydrator and it was already dry. We're going to do the same, but with the black icing in the middle. Now the reason we're doing this in the middle here, and we don't want to go too crazy. I just want to do kind of the size of my pumpkin. So this will be the background of the mouth and the eyes. So we're going to have a black background and then pipe the orange on top. So I just want to make sure that I cover enough area that when I design my eyes and my mouth, that everything is on the black icing. But I also don't want to go too much over into the purple because I don't want to cover the purple with black and make it kind of come out of the orange part. So here I am using my outline consistency to pipe some triangles for the eyes. And really you can make any design pumpkin you like, but this is just a simple one. I find if you do straight lines, it's much, much easier to pipe versus kind of circle round ones. If you're doing eyes and you're making really small circles, it's kind of difficult to keep it nice and even. So this is a kind of good, easy beginner design, I would say. The mouth here on the bottom is like a semicircle, but it's also a bigger line, so it's easier to do versus if you're doing a little circle for the nose or for the eyes. So now we have our face drawn out, and we're going to outline the rest of the pumpkin here. So I'm not too worried about where the black and purple start. The only thing I want is to make sure that the black is contained within my outside outlines. So just at the top there, you can see that where the black is stopped, that's where I had my line, but I don't want to make, but I wouldn't have gone any lower than that. So we're kind of doing a pumpkin that's a little bit off the cookie. And so I didn't do the full circle because we're focusing on the face here. And then I'm continuing with my outline consistency and I'm just drawing in a couple of extra lines to give that pumpkin a real good shape. And this is all with my outline consistency. You can see I'm taking my time, going slow. And then again with my outline consistency, I'm just doing squiggles in all the places that I'm going to be flooding. And I'm going to start with the middle section first. So I've done my squiggles with my outline. They're not dry and I'm going into pipe right away with my flood icing. Now I know when I'm doing this cookie that I'm going to be doing small sections like this. So I haven't cut a huge hole in my bag. If I'm flooding this whole cookie with orange icing on the base, I'd probably cut a bigger hole in my piping bag. But considering that I have to have real good control of how much icing is flowing out, because these are smaller sections and they're really small kind of corners and angles. So I don't want to cut a big bag where I don't have control over my flood. I like to make mine sort of a little bit looser. But again, if I'm doing these type of designs, then I have to keep in mind that if it's really liquid, then it may flow over the lines. Icing tends to want to spread out when it's liquidy, and so it wants to go away from where you piped it, even if you're containing it within those lines. If you put a little bit too much and your lines are thin, it may flow over. So I kind of always keep that in mind, and if I feel like it's getting too full, I won't pipe too much and I will kind of spread it more with my scribe. And then I've let this section dry in the middle. It's not fully dry, so you can see it's still a little bit shiny, but it's dry enough that if I pipe next to it, these next side sections, that they're not going to melt together. So then I'll have a nice divider line in my pumpkin. So I'm going again in with my flood, and I'm going to go really slow along these edges here, and I'm not putting a lot of pressure. So I'm barely squeezing with my right hand because I don't want a lot of icing to come out. In the bigger areas where I know I'm not near an edge, I can kind of put a little bit more pressure on my bag, but otherwise I'm going really slow, and you can see there's not a lot of icing necessarily coming out. It's not really spreading out a lot from the tip. You can see I kind of circle my bag sometimes to get it going again. Again, it's a smaller tip so the icing doesn't flow as freely, and sometimes the icing is not coming or I need it to kind of smooth out. So I just circle my bag just to smooth out the icing as I'm piping at the same time. And again, you can see I didn't go all the way to the bottom corner there just because it's really hard to get in there with my piping bag. So I'm just going to use my scribe to spread it out. I don't want to ruin that nice line that I have going down. And if I went in with my piping bag, I may have piped over some of it. So I just use my scribe and pull the icing all the way down to the corner. So anywhere I can't necessarily reach, then I will just use my scribe to drag the icing in there. And I like to pipe two-handed, so I've got the piping bag in my right hand and I steady myself with my left finger, and I have it against my bag or my palm sometimes. In this way, it just kind of keeps my hand steady. If you try to pipe with one hand, especially when you're pushing or putting pressure on the bag, it kind of starts, shaking a little bit. So it really, really steadies by having your second hand helping. And I like to secure my elbows or kind of my forearms on the table, have something secure. That way, nothing's kind of shaking and moving around. And you can see now the lines that I've created in the middle of the pumpkin kind of give us that bump shape that all the pumpkins have, the different sections. And if we didn't dry that section in the middle, it would have all kind of melted together. So that's the importance of keeping them separate and having times where you have to leave your cookies aside. And sometimes I'll do all the middle sections of all the cookies and then I'll come back. By the time I come back, they're kind of dry enough to move on. So here I have my outline consistency and I'm just adding the stem, and you can see it's a little bit bumpy and lumpy because again, it's my outline. It's a thicker icing. So I'm just working my scribe. The more you jiggle it and kind of move it around, you can also give a little shake to the cookie. And that's it. We've got a cool pumpkin cookie. Next up, we've got another pumpkin cookie, but on a circle shape. So here we're going to switch it up a bit and we're going to do a yellow background. So again, I've got my flood icing here and I've got a brush and I'm just going to spread out the icing. And we just need the icing to cover where the face is going to be. To get my yellow icing, I normally use two colors, lemon yellow and like an egg color. Egg I feel is too orangey yellow and lemon yellow is very light and bright. So I kind of mix a little bit of both and I feel like it gives me a really good yellow. This one I did a little bit more lemon yellow just to keep it bright because I wanted it to be like there was light inside shining through the pumpkin. So I kept it on the kind of brighter side. And then it's going to look really cool when it's done. So here we're going to do kind of those half circle eyes. And again, I'm going really slow. I'm keeping my piping bag super, super close to the cookie, just slightly above. Again, those circular shapes are really hard to do when it's small. So when I keep the piping bag really close, there's less room for error. There's less room for the icing line to kind of wiggle around and go in the wrong spot. Then I'm going to keep it simple for the nose and we're going to do an upside down triangle. Again, these are very small details, so I'm not lifting my piping bag up too high. The further I go, the higher I can lift my bag, but for these small little, I'm almost dragging the line on the cookie. Almost. I'm slightly lifting it up a bit. But if there's a tiny, like the bottom of those teeth or the edge of those teeth that are really tiny lines, you can almost just drag the line across. That way it kind of sticks to the cookie and it's not going where it's not supposed to. You can see now I'm outlining the outside of my cookie. So this is giving us a few seconds for the inside to dry. We want our outline to dry so that it holds its shape. But you can see on the outside here, I've lifted my piping bag much higher because that will give me a nice smooth line and I have a longer way to go. So if I lift it up, I have time to come back down. And again, we're going to add those kind of lines in the middle. This will give us a separation in the pumpkin. It looks a little crazy when you're outlining everything, but it all comes together once the flood, and I love how it just looks so great once you flooded it, because at this point now it just looks really, really crazy and chaotic. And you can do as many of these lines as you want if you want to make more sections. I do find though, the smaller, narrower their sections, the more kind of risk for cratering you have. Even when you put down a squiggly line to prevent those craters, sometimes it happens. So, and these again, even though the area somewhat looks big, it still is pretty small. The sections are small that I have to flood, especially where the face is. So I don't want to go too crazy and make them too small and make my job a lot harder than it should be. So I'm going to put down those squiggles. Looks like he has a mustache at this point, but we're going to cover all of that. And again, I'm going to go in with my flood here, and I'm just going really slow. So again, if I have a big cookie and I've outlined the edges, then I can go faster. In the middle, put more pressure. But here, especially in those narrow areas between the eyes and nose, I'm going really slow, and there's not a lot of icing coming out at once. And that's because I have a small hole in my bag and I'm not putting a lot of pressure. So the more pressure you put on your bag, the more your icing will flow. And if your piping bag is close to your cookie, your icing will spread out and kind of fill a bigger area. So it's all about how much pressure you're using with your hand, and it takes practice. You can practice on a paper towel or maybe some wax paper, parchment paper, and just, squeeze out a little bit of icing, make lines, squish a little harder, squish softer, practice touching down, lifting up, and touching it down again. Those are kind of the techniques that you use on your cookie. And eventually you'll get the hang of it and you'll see kind of what works. If you want a smaller hole always and you want to have control, if you want to have a bigger hole and you want more icing to come out so you can fill your cookies faster, it really depends on what you're most comfortable with. And I always have my scribe. It's such a good tool. It's such a cheap, great tool. If you don't have a scribe, you can use a toothpick or like a shish kebab stick, even anything that's kind of a little bit pointy that will help you smooth out that icing. And it's so nice when you smooth it all out. It looks so great after. So I've let this middle section dry a little bit. Again, I threw it in my dehydrator on a very, very low heat setting. It's barely warm, and it's just for the fan to kind of circulate the air and dry that icing. Still a little bit wet. If I poke my finger through this, the icing will kind of crumble in and be wet underneath. But this will just allow that separation of icing to happen so that when I flood next to it, it's not going to just melt into the middle section. And again, just going really slow along the edge. And sometimes if you pipe too close to the cookie, the icing doesn't quite come out properly and it almost backs up into the bag. So sometimes you'll see me kind of circling around just to get the icing kind of spread out and give it room to come out nicely. And then in the middle there, I'm just pushing a little bit more pressure, and you can see the bubble of the icing coming out is a little bit bigger than what I was doing on the edges there. And again, to get into those little tiny corners, just use your scribe, and I'm just gently hovering the scribe on the top. Remember, I did the squiggle on the bottom. I don't want to mess too much with the squiggle, so I'm just the very top layer of icing, just fixing it up a bit. I'm going to do the exact same with the other side and just take my time as I'm going down those lines and just go as slow as I can to have full control. Sometimes when I go in those really, really small corners, I'll lift my bag up slightly higher and just kind of almost just get a drop of icing in there just to get it enough into the corners. And again, if I can get into the corner, great. If I can't, sometimes the icing will fill itself in. Sometimes it leaves a little hole like that. I can just get my scribe and fix that up, no problem. And again, just taking my time, letting the icing do the work, but taking my time piping it, having full control, as this isn't a huge cookie and we don't want the icing spilling over the sides or onto the yellow part where we've piped. And then we're just going to add a little bit of greenery at the top here. This is just my outline consistency again. And these sections have now all pretty much dried, not fully, but dry enough for me to pipe the next layer. And again, staying really close to the cookie to have full control. And I'm just going to fill it in with my outline as well. So I'm not going to this is way too small for me to do a section with flood. So I'm just going to do that. I don't have to worry about cratering because it's thicker icing. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of a peak here for the stem. And there we have it. A super cute Halloween pumpkin. And last but not least, we're going to switch it up a bit and do a Frankenstein pumpkin. So again, this is a pumpkin shape now, and we're going to change it up. Instead of doing our typical pumpkin face that we've done before, we're going to do a Frankenstein face. So I'm just going to do 3 circles, and this cutter I believe is one of the Wilton cutters that has come in the box. It was like 101 cutters that come, and it's got Christmas and Halloween, Easter, and a bunch of other kind of circle shapes and star shapes, which is great. It's a great beginner set because it's quite cheap and you get a ton of cutters, and the cutters are pretty good quality, and it allows you to kind of do different designs and have a good set of, beginner cutters to start off with. I use a lot of them in my videos a lot of times, and do different shapes with them or different designs, and it's kind of good to have when you don't want to spend too much but you do want different shapes, not just all circles and squares and rectangles. So I usually like to let my outline dry, and then I'll kind of put it to a side and I'll outline all my cookies, and then I'll come back from the beginning one and it'll be all dry and I can go ahead and pipe. And the reason I like to do that is that it holds the shape better. Sometimes when you outline and it's still kind of wet and then you go into pipe, it pushes your outline because you're kind of putting pressure on the bag, and the icing's flowing outward. It's kind of pushing that outline off. So sometimes the outline will move a little bit and then it will not look how I wanted to. It's not staying where I was piping it originally. So I do like to let the outlines dry. And again, they don't take long to dry, maybe a few minutes, 5 minutes. So if you're doing multiple cookies, by the time you come back, it'll be dry. And the reason it doesn't take too long is because it's thicker icing and there's not as much water in there, so they dry pretty quick. And again, I let that middle section dry, and then I'm going to go and do the outside sections. I've put my squiggle in there to support the icing, get no craters, and I'm going really slow along the edge. And I'm really letting the icing do the work. So I'm having it close to the edge and the icing is spreading up against that line, because if I tried to angle my bag against the line, I can't keep it steady enough for that line to be nice and smooth and straight. So we'll see on the next section, when I'm putting the icing near the edge there, I'm kind of letting the icing bubble out towards it. So I'm pushing enough pressure there, and you can see the tip is more inward, away from the edge, that kind of line between the cookie where I'm piping in the middle, and the icing is bubbling towards the middle, and then it's just kind of making a nice smooth line for me. So that's kind of the way you want to do it when you're piping next to another section. When I'm piping near the outline, I kind of go half on the outline, half inside to cover the outline ever so slightly. If it's really hard to do that, no worries. Like you can always pipe inside the outline, but I slightly go closer to the outlines. That way I can kind of cover them and they're not so visible. And then I'm going to outline the hair with some black icing here. And this is my outline consistency. And again, staying really close to the cookies. These are small lines that I'm doing. So I'm not really lifting up my piping bag, just ever so slightly. If you don't lift up your piping bag, you don't really get those nice, straight, smooth lines. You kind of get a shaky line. So it's much better if you just slightly lift it up. When you're doing bigger lines, longer lines, you can lift up your bag higher and it's a little bit more comfortable. But for those small lines, you just want to hover just slightly above. You don't really want to drag your line, but you don't want to lift your bag up too much because they're small lines, and by the time you come back down with your bag to touch it down, your line has gone way further than you want it to. And this little stem here, I'm just going to fill it in right away. I'm not even going to outline and then fill it. I'm just going to do it all with outline consistency. And then I'm just going to smooth it all with my scribe. Such a tiny area, it's no problem with my outline. My outline isn't super thick that I can't smooth it out. So this is much easier to do it this way. So for the eyes here, I'm just going to grab my white outline consistency. I'm going to wiggle my bag as I'm putting pressure in the same spot. And this will smooth the icing out as I'm building up those eyes. So if I need to add more, I can just kind of put my piping bag down again and fill it up. And then right away, I'm going to go in with my black icing once I've smoothed this in. So I'm just going to give the eyes a little wiggle with the scribe, and that will really smooth them out. And then before they dry, I'm going to go in with my black outline consistency. And I'm just basically touching right to the tip of the eye and just, again, putting pressure in one spot and just trying to make them even here so I can go back and fill if I need more. And then again, I'm going to grab my scribe. Sometimes you end up with a little peak. And so you can just put your scribe inside there and just give it a really little jiggle there, and you can see it's smoothed out really, really nicely. Then we're going to move on to the mouth here. I'm going to touch down my icing, and you can see I lift up and my line kind of falls nice and smooth, and touch back down to secure the line. So when you have a nice smooth line, if you lift it up a bit, again, using my scribe to just fix it at the end there, I just wanted to make it a little bit more straight and touch down a bit. And then we're going to do our scar marks here. So again, if you need your scribe to smooth something out or put the line down if it didn't secure properly. And again, these are tiny, tiny lines. So I'm just touching down, and you can see sometimes it doesn't stick. So you just want to touch it down to the cookie a bit. I squish out a little bit of icing to get it to blob out of the piping bag, just to touch down onto the cookie and stick. And then I lift it up a bit to get over the line. And then again, I touch down. Almost like when you touch down to end it, you kind of sort of wipe it off on the cookie if you think about it. You touch down, but you kind of wipe it away so it breaks your line. And then we're going to add some teeth here. And again, the reason why I did the mouth, then I moved to the scars, then I went back to the teeth, it gives that original black line on the mouth time to dry before I add the teeth. Sometimes when you go and do details like this next to each other, when they're not dry, if you start piping, it might get a little black icing on the white and so on. So this way, if I do different steps at different times, it allows them to dry in between, and then it helps the icing stay where it's supposed to be and not mix with the other colors. Now I'm going to go in with my flood icing, and I'm going to fill in the hair. And again, if you any issues or you can't get into those corners, you can use your scribe. And notice I didn't put a squiggly line for this one, and the reason being is because the icing underneath is still kind of wet. There's a crust on it, but underneath that crust, the icing is still wet. And so this is a really big, helpful way to prevent craters as well. You could put a squiggly line if you're not sure and you don't know. That would be no problem. But in this case, between having it on kind of semi-wet icing and putting my dehydrator, normally when you do layers like this, it's a big way to prevent craters. It's one of the best ways I do it. But when you're piping on the base of the cookie and there's no icing yet, then that's when you have to use those squiggles really well. Otherwise, you try to build your layers on top of kind of semi-dry icing. Then again, I smooth it out with my scribe, just slowly. Don't want to poke holes too much or damage anything. So I'm just slowly going on the top layer of my icing there and just making it a little bit more pointy. And there we have a Frankenstein cookie that we turned our pumpkin cutter into. So I hope you enjoyed these pumpkin cookies and you get to try some this Halloween. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Happy baking!